I'm your host today. My name is Priscilla Jebaraj, and I'm a senior deputy editor with The Hindu. The Hindu's recent analysis of data from the Central Adoption Resource Authority, which is better known as CARA, highlights the long waiting period that many prospective adoptive parents face before taking their children home. And as of mid-July 2025, many parents seeking to adopt a healthy baby through CARA can wait well over 3 years from the time they register. In fact, we found that for every child declared free for adoption in the system right now, there are 13 prospective parents waiting on average across age groups. And so there's a perception among many people that this situation is due to very strict requirements and lengthy procedures which are being imposed by CARA. So that's what we're going to discuss in this week's Parley podcast by The Hindu. Hello and welcome. I'm your host today. My name is Priscilla Jebaraj, and I'm a senior deputy editor with The Hindu. But more importantly for this discussion, I'm an adoptive parent. And both my guests today are adoptive parents as well. Very happy to welcome Dr. Aloma Lobo. She's a former chairperson of CARA. She also works as an adoption counsellor. We also have Ms. Smriti Gupta, who runs an NGO called Where Are India's Children, supporting efforts to bring eligible children into the adoption pool. Welcome both of you, and thank you for agreeing to be part of this discussion.
Thanks for having this.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so let's start with this perception that the reason for delays in adoption is that CARA's adoption procedures are lengthy and strict. The Supreme Court also has directed CARA to ease procedures to facilitate speedier adoptions. But is this the reason for the delays? Is that true in your experience? Can we start with Smriti?
Sure. Priscilla, thanks for the question. I believe that no, procedures are not the reason for the delays, because the delays stem mostly from the fact that the number of people waiting to adopt is higher than the number of children that are legally free for adoption. So most of the delay is in the waiting time to be matched. And there are children with special needs and older children who could be adopted immediately who are waiting for parents. But if you look at majority of the parent pool, they're waiting to adopt a young child in the normal health category. And the delays are from the waiting and not the procedures. If the procedures have to be reviewed or looked at for other reasons, that's a different story. But changing procedures is not going to necessarily do anything for the delay.
Okay, thank you. Aloma, could you speak to that? And also, as you were chairperson of CARA around the time that, the current procedures were being put into place just before they were, and you've seen, therefore, several ways in which these procedures can work. Could you say that they need to be changed, especially with regard to delays?
Actually, I completely agree with Smriti. And there are fewer children in the adoption stream as compared to the number of parents who are waiting. And this was never like that before. In the past, we could place children almost immediately because there were very few parents waiting. Actually, they were never waiting. There were just a few parents there. Now, the procedures, I do believe, are absolutely necessary. And it's mainly these checks and balances that ensure that we don't have trafficking, that we don't have improper placements. As we can see today, there have been cases filed all in several parts of the world about children who were placed illegally. And we don't want that to happen here. Now, I do believe that the procedures are necessary. The checks and balances are absolutely necessary. But whether CARA can sort of just hurry it up a bit, at the present time, I'm in no position to say so. But in the past, CARA did do it as fast as they possibly could. But at the present time, perhaps things could be hurried up just a little bit. But the checks and balances as they remain are necessary.
Thank you so much. So we've been speaking, of course, about adoption procedures for parents, right? There's also the procedures that are involved in bringing children into the adoption pool in the first place. And Smriti, you've been working on that. Could you tell us what is the process and are there delays there? Is that why there are so few children in the adoption pool?
Sure. So, Priscilla, the way we look at the adoption process, I would say there is part 1 and part 2. Part 1 is where we bring the kids into the legal adoption pool. Now, that part happens at the district level. So every single district has child shelters, adoption agencies, which need to be linked together. And children in adoption agencies obviously get evaluated for potential adoptability, but kids in child shelters also need to get evaluated to check whether they need to come into the legal adoption pool. So that's part one, and that happens at the very district level. And then there is part two, which is where the child is legally adoptable, is in the CARA system, and then the child is matched with a parent. So the part two, I believe, is quite smooth now. It's well done. And as Dr. Aloma said, maybe things could be hurried up a bit, but it functions. Now, where we work and where India's Children is part one, which is to bring kids into the legal adoption pool, because that's where we see today's challenge is. Whether it's because of apathy, whether it's because of lack of training or lack of resources. Again and again, as we go into these shelters, we see kids who have been in shelters for years, kids who are abandoned and orphaned, could be brought into the legal adoption pool, or at least their cases should be looked at, and which are not. And we believe that that's the reason, that's where the focus needs to be, is to bring eligible children into the legal adoption pool at each district level.
Before I go to Aloma, Smriti, could you just speak about how you do that, or how you help doing that through your NGO?
Of course. So, we work with the approval of the state's Women and Child Development Department. So we cannot approach kids in a shelter without formal approvals. So we do get approvals from the government, then we go to approach these shelters, and the first step we do is we digitize the data of all the kids. So let's say a shelter has 100 children. We'll digitize the child's data, and the type of data we collect is very pertinent to figuring out whether this child should continue to be in the shelter, or should this child be brought into the legal adoption pool. So for example, we have about 22 categories that we have created. We have our own software. It's an open source software. In those 22 categories, we'll assign things like, is this child abandoned? If the child has parents, what's the reason, right? So the 6 different types of reasons why the child could be in the shelter. So first we digitize all the data. And then the system perhaps, let's say, flags 30 out of 100 children to say, let's look at their cases. Then our social workers would work on those cases on a case-by-case basis. So for each child, we'll study the files, we'll make sure the child's, the due process to bring the child into the legal adoption pool is done, all the paperwork is done. So that's what we work on. We work on due diligence, we work on the paperwork of kids who we identify could potentially be adoptable, and we complete the paperwork. And once it's done, the child is presented to the Child Welfare Committee of the district, and they are the authority body that decide whether the child should be declared legally free for adoption or not. So we essentially do the legwork that the child needs to be able to be presented to this authority.
Right. So we're talking therefore about the need to, in some ways, reform or to facilitate and speed up the procedures on the other side of the adoption story of bringing children into the adoption pool. Aloma, we see whether in terms of general anecdotal perception, we see children on the streets. There's so many children in India. The idea is there's so many children who are orphaned. Data says the 2020 World Orphan Report estimated 3.1 crore children in India who are orphans. Are all these children, in your understanding, really, should they be available for adoption? Why is there only, 2,000 odd children in the legal adoption pool by CARA? Is it simply a matter of procedures?
Actually, this word orphan is very often loosely used. And many of these children have families, or they may not have parents, but they have extended families. And most of the children who come into the adoption stream as babies are children who are relinquished, not abandoned. They're children who are relinquished by unwed mothers, or by it's usually a girl next to a girl child that is born. I think that there are children on the streets, there are children everywhere, and as Smriti said, they really have to evaluate, are these children truly free for adoption? Are they truly, quote unquote, orphans? Are they really orphans? Or are they just children with families roaming the streets? Now, I have several times I've seen children at traffic lights, and I've sort of called them across and I've asked them where their parents are. And we've seen them practically every time we've passed by. But they say our parents are down the road and to the right, they're living in a hut or in a tent or something, And to everybody's understanding, these are orphan children, the children who have nobody. But most of these children on the streets do have somebody who is looking out for them.
Right. And you mentioned earlier about these reports that have come out internationally, mostly with regard to international adoptions, where people who were adopted as children, their adoptive parents were told they were orphans, but when they grow up, they have found out, sometimes through DNA studies, sometimes simply through investigation, that they actually do have parents back in their countries. And this, of course, causes. Could you speak to that, and how we need to ensure that that doesn't happen in India, or does it happen?
No, here, the misconception is that here, these are children who were probably, they could have been, number one, relinquished by their parents, which is absolutely legal. Today they go through the Child Welfare Committee, but in the past they didn't have to go through the Child Welfare Committee, but they did have to be certified as free for adoption by the Department of Women and Child Development. That was before the new CARA guidelines, etc. And there were also those children who were illegally taken away from their mothers or parents, and they were told the children had disappeared or died, and they were given away in adoption. Now, this happened many, many years ago in some countries, and today there are legal cases against them. So the fact that there are parents, I mean, all our kids would have parents sitting, biological parents sitting somewhere. It doesn't mean orphan, just means that they've been relinquished by their biological parents. It doesn't necessarily mean that there are no biological parents.
To add to that, Priscilla, I agree with Dr. Aloma. See, so when we say orphan, right, like to put it crudely, there cannot be that many parents who have passed away, right, to say there are millions of orphans. So what we are essentially saying is that there are so many parents who are not raising their kids on a day-to-day basis. Either they have abandoned their kids, either they have put their kids in shelters, either they have relinquished their kids. And those kids do need a second family, right? They do need a permanent home. So the word orphan may be loosely used. What we need to look at is, what is the status of all these children? Are they being raised in a safe environment where they are wanted? And if not, what is the next step for them?
Right. What I was also trying to get at, though, is that, with these reports that come, I think South Korea put out a very comprehensive report as a country from which children have been adopted. France had a recent report as a country where many adoptive parents were. And there's a certain an acknowledgement now that partly it was this demand for children that came from adopting countries that led to some of the abuses of the system. And I wonder whether that demand that is increasing in India. Now we say that 13 parents are waiting for every adoptive child, and you constantly hear, and when the cases go to court, it's invariably from adoptive parents saying that we want more children in the system. How do we ensure safeguards to ensure that children are not brought in response to this supply-demand situation, and that there are no abuses, both within the CARA system as well as, of course, through trafficking, which occurs? Either of you want to speak to that?
That's why we need the checks and balances at CARA, and so that to avoid the fact that children can be trafficked quite easily from nursing homes and from hospitals, and it happens quite a bit. But Smriti, you go ahead. You talk about the first part in particular.
Right. So as Dr. Aloma said, that's where the procedure come into play. So when people are saying relax the procedures, no, the procedures are needed. The checks and balances are needed for both on the parent side to make sure people who are adopting the kids, right, that they're prepared for it, they're doing it for the right reasons. And then on the child side to make sure that we bring a child into the legal adoption pool, who's truly eligible to be adopted. So that's where the procedures, and I think there has been a lot of improvement made over the last few years. And to speak of this demand supply thing, Priscilla, specifically, now the way I see it, right, like where are India's children? We work with shelters where children tend to be over the age of 6 years, whereas the age group that you are talking about are very young children, right, like they're babies. And in that case, we do hear of there being this gray area or black market where the kids are not coming into adoption agencies and being placed for adoption, right? They're just sort of being given away. So I would say the bigger risk is kids not coming into the legal adoption system. I think that's where the trouble is. And that's what you want to do for them, whether they're babies, whether they're 10 years old, whether they're 15 years old, for them to be routed through the legal adoption pool. And that's how you avoid, all these things that happened decades ago.
I think an important fact to remember here is that we are finding a family for a child. We're not finding a child for a family. And in the best interest of the child, for its safety, for its secure placement, we need to go to the checks and balances, whether it's a baby or whether it's an older child. And as Smriti said, I agree that the older children which come through her system are usually older. Where we are really concerned about is the babies that come into the system also. Babies can be placed in the past. Babies have been placed quite irregularly with families. By irregular, I mean illegally.
Yes. Thank you also for emphasizing that, it's about finding a family for a child and not looking for a child for the family. That speaks to also whether our system is child-centric or whether it's parent-centric. And I think most of CARA's regulations do emphasize the child-centric nature of adoption as it should be. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
Same here.
Yeah. So let's move to another issue which we've touched upon a little bit. But this idea that there are no children or that there are very few children comes down to largely babies. The vast majority of adoptive parents are looking for a child between 0 to 2, or at the most when they realize that there's a long wait, sometimes they look at the age 2 to 4, which is now increasingly as long a wait as the 0 to 2 slab. But there are many children who are available, who are waiting for families who are over the age of 6, as well as children who have special needs. What do you think needs to be done to increase the adoption rates of these children?
Can I just go there? I'm particularly concerned about children with special needs. Now, there are two things. These long waiting lists do have an effect on the child, and a long waiting period, rather, does have an effect on the child who's waiting in a non-parental situation, which is not the best for a child, and on parents too, who get so frustrated waiting this long. But I think the worst repercussions come on children who have special needs. I've done many placements of children with special needs. I myself have a child with special needs. And I find that the quicker a child with special needs is placed, the better it is. There is a list called the immediate placement list, which I really frown upon, because it's kind of saying, if you take an older child, if you take a child with special needs, it's kind of their second-class citizens, and we'll place them immediately without. And there have been many children that have been placed, such children who have been placed with families, and the majority have been returned. So we must just stop and pause over here and think about placing children with special needs, older children, and children with medical and whatever special needs. We have to pause and think, should we really place them as quote unquote fast as possible? Or should we really be child-centric here and be a little careful?
Be a little careful in the sense of, would you say, to do further checks on parents to make sure they're prepared for this, or counseling? Or you think these children are adopted by parents outside the country? So which way are you talking about? Or are you thinking should stay in institutions?
No, I'm saying that children who are adopted by parents outside the country are properly prepared. There are parents over here who say we can't wait 3 to 5 years for a baby, so we'll take a child from the immediate placement list. And they take a child with special needs and they're not prepared for it. They're not prepared for it. And for them, it's just getting a child. It's not we're understanding that a child with special needs is a long-term commitment.
Right.
And they've returned these children because, so in the interest of these children, again, we have to find the right family for these children, whether they're placed abroad or whether they're placed in India. And they shouldn't be treated like commodities that you can just really get one, take one, get two free, some kind of stuff, and get them placed immediately.
Yeah, you know what a double disaster, as you said, being returned is, that's just such a tragedy. Smriti?
Sure. So there are a couple of points I want to make. First, I want to say, in terms of kids coming into the legal adoption pool, more kids coming, even though most of the parents are waiting for younger children, from a child-centric view, when we bring kids into the legal adoption pool, it has to be all eligible children. Doesn't matter the age, doesn't matter the health, like whether the child is in the normal health category or special need, whether the child is 2 years or 12 years old or even 16 years old.
Yeah.
All those children need to be evaluated and get into the legal adoption pool. And I do feel from the time that I adopted, like a decade ago, I do see a change in parents. I do see, more special need kids being adopted, more older children being adopted. In fact, there is probably a wait time now to adopt a girl child up to the age of 10 years. So that landscape is changing. Of course, there is the other side of it that Dr. Aloma mentioned, which is, dissolution, and some kids coming back. But overall, I do see a little bit of a positive change in how parents, think about adoption and being more child-centric. So that's the first. And then second, talking about special need and older child, I completely agree with the fact that parents need more training, more counseling. So what I have seen, so I'm in both, domestic Indian adoption groups as well as international groups. And one of the differences I have seen is in international adoption, the parents, the training, there's formal training that the agencies do, that the parents have to go through hours and hours of, formal training before they can even, before they can adopt the child or their home study gets approved. We don't have an equivalent training, mandatory training for domestic adoptions. So when and a lot of times for normal health category children, maybe it works out, right? But when you're talking about children who need a bit more support, or the children do not need support, where the parents need a better mindset, whether that's a special need adoption or whether that's an older child adoption, I do think a training of parents should be part of the flow, should be part of the home study flow, and should be the part of the flow till the child comes home. I remember just, sharing an experience. One of my husband's nephew and his wife, they adopted, and they were living in US at the time when they adopted from India, and they went through the training. And so my husband's nephew's wife talked to me and she said, the training scared us. She's like, they talk about all these things that could go wrong. And she wanted my perspective on it. And I told her, look, they're training you so you're prepared. All of these things are not going to happen. But, before you go adopt a child, you need to know what all you need to be mentally ready for. And that's what the training exists. So I'm sorry for the very long answer. But yeah, for special need and older child adoption, we do need, I believe, good modules of training and counseling prior to the child being adopted for the parents. Like, we need the training for the parents.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, I registered looking for a healthy baby. And after I registered, I joined a number of these groups. And two things really helped me. One was I did do some training with Aloma, with Padme, I think, the organization. That counseling was eye-opening. But also joining one of the international groups and actually see, as you say, in some ways, seeing how hard it can be. Almost all the international adoptions are now special needs, especially those who are not from Indian origin. And seeing how hard it could be and yet rewarding, I was like, why am I not considering that? And that's really what made me consider it. And I also ultimately ended up adopting from the special needs list, a child with special needs. But it's true that just more awareness and more training and counseling would be welcome. Is this something that you would recommend then that CARA do, or that is provided privately but made mandatory by CARA regulations? In a sense, here we're calling for more regulations, if you notice.
Actually, it is mandatory. In the home study, you're supposed to have had adequate training and adequate counseling and adequate preparation. I think the most important thing is to find out the motivation to adopt and then to go through all that with the counseling and the preparation. In the past, we did have, when we had the ACA, we did have several sessions of counseling, group counseling and individual counseling. But that is all gone now. And many of the home studies are like intake forms, which are not really adequate as home studies. If you compare them, as Smriti said, to the foreign home studies, they're quite different. Now, on another note, my eldest daughter, whom I adopted, is now 46 years old. 46 years ago, we had no counseling, no preparation. We just got a child. And it worked out pretty well also. So it's we do need preparation. I still emphasize that we do need counseling and preparation. But it all depends also to a great extent on what really happens,
It's also mindset and motivation.
And that's very true. Like in our daughter's adoptions as well, we did not go through any training or counseling. And both my kids have some certain needs. So I would say, like, looking at that, for me to say everybody should get counseling and training is a little odd because I personally didn't go through it. But, just because we didn't do it, doesn't mean it's not a good idea.
And nobody trains us for biological children.
Correct.
Yes. So this is also a point of, leaving aside special needs children, many parents looking for a healthy child. This is a repeating refrain from a prospective adoptive parents. At the moment they get their referral and they look at it, and then it happens so frequently that they say, but this child has this, or you have not checked this, or I don't think this child is meeting developmental milestones. And so they say that they are going to complain to CARA that this child should not be on the healthy list. What would you say to parents who complain of this? This is not a one-off situation. It happens the whole time.
That is true. I've come across several families who've had the same experience. I think they should be really, many agencies don't know, they haven't really examined the child completely by a good pediatrician. They're unaware of some of the situations that might arise. But I agree that these children, they should just be healthy children on the healthy list. And if there are minor conditions, they can still be on the healthy list. But any major medical condition, they should be put on the list with special needs. There's a list of special needs. Unfortunately, some conditions are not on that list of special needs. So they put them on the healthy child list.
And Priscilla, this is where I rant and rave because I see that too, especially in a lot of Facebook adoption groups where people would say, well, I signed up for the normal health category, but the kid has XYZ, so the kid should be in the special need list. And I always, have to go in and I have to disagree. Just because the child has certain health needs does not qualify the child to be a special needs child. There is a specific criteria for that. And, that's the criteria that has to be matched. And any child in the world would have certain health needs. So that doesn't automatically make that child special needs. If we went by that logic, all of us are special needs in a way, right? All of us have some health needs. So I do think that's where, again, counseling and training maybe can play a role to tell parents, look, when it says that the child is in the normal category, it means they do not have any identifiable special needs. It does not mean that they would not have any health or medical needs that the parents wouldn't have to support. And I think this is the type of knowledge, PAPs need to have before they go and adopt.
Right, and especially also the understanding that a child in an institution will have.
I was just coming to
AIDS as well. Yeah, go ahead.
No, children who are for a long time, especially older children who have been for a long time in an institution, and they certainly do have certain anxieties and certain problems. I won't even put them problems, certain challenges, and many parents are not aware of it. Actually, if I may just, with great trepidation, say many pediatricians are not aware of that also. I remember when I took one child to a pediatrician soon after we adopted her, he said, oh, she's very slow, she's very this. And she wasn't slow at all. She now has a degree in business with the first class. And he said, why would you take a child? And the thing is, pediatricians expect, that big bouncing, happy, spitty baby with, and they don't expect a child who's a little nervous, who's scared, who's perhaps underweight, usually underweight. And so I think, we have to, as Smriti rightly said, we have to stop and understand that a child that's in an institution will certainly be a little different from the healthy child that belongs to your first cousin from Bombay.
Right. Yeah. So we've sort of come around to, the checks and balances that are needed. We do need some more training and counseling, but also mindset changes to ensure that adoption in India is, as CARA guidelines require, a child-centric process rather than a parent-centric process. Anything else that either of you would like to speak to that we haven't covered?
I think also I would say one of the things, and I know we are talking about procedures here, I think a lot of it also has to do with, I apologize if it comes across as rude, right? Like the right type of parents adopting. And the reason I say that is because, when it's not just about adoption. I remember when I had first adopted, right? Like I wanted everybody to adopt. I was like, I'm still passionate, but at the time, I think I was passionate and probably like a little stupid. So I was like, everybody should adopt. And, I wanted like every friend of mine, every cousin, every neighbor to be like, why are you not adopting a kid? You should go out and do that. And over time, I realized, right, like there is a certain profile perhaps or a certain mental readiness or heart readiness that's needed to be the right parent for a kid. And I think it's important. It's not, procedures and everything are important, but also, almost like funneling the right parents. I don't know what's the right way to do it. Again, maybe it's training, counseling, preparing that. Most recently, I saw this comment on a Facebook group where somebody asked that, hey, when you adopt a baby, there are certain health needs that are, not obvious. So you adopt a child from a normal category, and later on, if the child develops some health issues, or you find out later on, if the child has some sort of a special need, is there a way to dissolve the adoption and give the child back? Like after I got over my initial horror, I replied and I said, please do not adopt. That was my reply to that person who posted it, because I don't think that person was ready. Because the way we adopted it was whichever child comes into our life is our child, period. So I would say there is just, so, and whether there's one of the thoughts that I have is like, now that I have wisened up over time, is to basically say, well, it's not just adoption. It's just, the parent with the right mindset needs to adopt.
Actually, Smriti, I agree with you 100%. Some things you can do, some things you can't do. I can take a child and I can cuddle with the child and I can say, oh, this is my baby. But I certainly cannot take my neighbor's dog and cuddle with the dog and say, this is my baby. And they can do it. There are some things you can't, like my sister says, I could never adopt a child. That she can do other things that I can't do. Yeah, there is a particular kind of person with a mindset that allows you to adopt a child. And not everybody can, and not everybody can't. I think it's many people just cannot think of it.
Yeah, that's so true. And maybe, as you said, Smriti, that perhaps we need to scare parents a little bit more with reality, which might weed out some of those who are not really ready, who don't have a heart and a mindset, which is...
I know. I came across someone just 2 days ago at a party who said, oh, I've always wanted to adopt. I want to give back to society. I want to do something for these poor children. I said, don't you dare adopt. This do-gooder thing also is really bad.
Thank you so much, both of you, for the insights you've raised. And thank you for being part of this conversation.
Thank you. Thanks.